Welcome, Sir Matt, back to my royal court. The Royal Sir Matthew, Order of the Poker, Slayer of the Beast of St. Barnabas. What news do you have of my enemies?
Well, Sir Buck, King Buck.
That's better.
Forgot my place. Sorry. To the south, we have reports of great stores of grain. They're hoarding grain and food down there.
Yes, food. It tickles my royal belly just thinking about slaying our southern enemies. What else do you have to report?
And to the west, they're amassing great hoards of gold and riches.
Riches. It tickles my little Jewish heart just thinking about all of that gold. Yes.
And to the east, they have very beautiful maidens, very beautiful women there.
Reaping. Always a good pastime. I do enjoy putting the king's saber into the cave of winches.
Yeah.
Yes.
Sounds delightful.
Yes.
To the north, there are many heretics. They believe in a different god than ours.
Holy macaroni!
Yes.
They shall be slaughtered by my armies!
They're the worst of all. Yes.
Yes! Let us go forth and conquer those lands!
Yes, God wills it!
God wills it! Hi, and welcome to Neckbeard Nation, the show where things happen and stuff and things. I am Buck, this is Matt, and today, in our old neckbeardy kind of fun-loving way, we're gonna talk about war. Because war is sort of an all-present thing in history. Going all the way back to before we were a species, people were killing people, and
monkeys
were killing monkeys, Neanderthals were killing Neanderthals, people were killing Neanderthals, probably some Neanderthals were killing people, monkeys might have gotten into it too, who knows.
They're probably all having sex with each other at the same time, but that's a different show.
Well, they were probably, they're kill fucking. A lot of people like to fuck corpses, so, that's always fun. Anyways, back to the show. I have my gobble of pop. Matt has his koi for the day. And let's get into the meat and potatoes of the matter. Since war has been such a critical part of our history as a species, we thought we would start with a chronology, as we often do. And as such, we have started with the beginning of time, and we'll move on from there. But first, we ask Matt for a little Matt moment of describing some of the rationales behind war throughout the years. Matt?
When we were discussing this before, in my everyday life, I notice, these things, like, I noticed that, I kind of realized that war kind of started with, like, tribalism, like, we'll band together and form a community, and then we'll work together to attack those other guys who aren't part of us, and then, maybe we'll gain from that, and, so, it basically, I feel like it all ties back to, like, tribalism and, like, a jingoistic type attitude, like, we're the best, our place is the best, everyone else can die for all we care, so it's like, when you create that atmosphere of we're better than everybody else, then, I don't know, it's just like, you know what I'm saying? It's like, whenever you put yourself higher than anybody else, it gives you a reason to cause harm to the other people, or take advantage of them, or, you know what I mean, take whatever you want,
Absolutely.
So, I realized that, like, it all started with that, but it still happens to this day. It's like even in everyday life, like sports teams are really, it's crazy. They're like almost like tribes. It's like these are our colors. We're the best. F everybody else. Like where it goes so far as to like sports fans get beat up outside of games and like
absolutely.
So I don't know if it's like us kind of latching on to that, or some kind of like primal thing inside of us where like
you see another group as the other, the outsider, you will have no trouble committing crimes towards them.
Yeah.
It is very much as when Justice Marshall penned that the native peoples have no right to purchase land as they are a conquered people. And since we had to put ourselves above them, they were no longer part of our legal society.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's crazy. But I just wanted to say, like, it happens on smaller levels, too. If you guys, I don't know if you've ever experienced it or just kind of watched for it, It's like, even people, like, the whole gang thing, like, East Side, West Side, it's like, dude, we're all people, It's like happening to be born somewhere or being from some place doesn't make you different. Well, I guess it might make you different, but it doesn't make you better than anybody else. So it just drives me nuts, and I just see it all the time, and I don't know. Just wanted to touch on
yes, it absolutely does happen all the time. Who could really tell apart a Hutu from a Tutsi? And yet they, killed the shit out of each other.
I don't even know what you just said, but...
Remember, no, that's from the Rwanda genocide.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Sounded like a Dr. Seuss book, but okay.
Yeah, oh, well, lovely. We're going to get some great mail for that. So, yeah, it is often in that, but there's also a notion of empire that comes out of all of this, and certainly while it is a background notion, the whole jingoistic tribalistic method of war analysis, it has manifested itself in very different ways throughout the years in terms of the way that the other is couched, be it as a different religion, a different race, a different, anything at all. We go to this notion that our country is a sacred thing. And, how is our country's people any different from Canadians? They're not. But, our country has great people and somehow they don't. It just makes no sense whatsoever. And so you go from that sort of modernity in this tribalistic notion, and you could see remnants from just the ancient, bloody, violent spirit of man. And going forward, it's looking like as we learn more about ourselves, I think war will be shortly becoming less and less prevalent, less and less violent, as statistics show it has over recent years. It's the safest time to be a person ever. So
whether the news says it or not.
Yes. So let us go in the Wayback Machine back all the way to let's start in Africa at the beginning of humanity and the ways they would wage warfare. They find stones often piled up and evidences that early tribes engaged in warfare each other with sort of guerrilla tactics and would pounce upon anyone in their territory and squash them and take their things. And certainly this is the beginning of a real organized warfare amongst men. After that, you get to sort of the classical periods of history. Certainly ancient Egypt, ancient China, many civilizations in ancient Mesopotamia. They took the idea of war and really expanded it to new levels, going out, seeking war, conquering as much territory as they could for their own prestige, and couching it back in these tribalistic terms. And they would, and that's how they grew some of the first countries. Now, you could argue that some of these first countries may have had a civilizing effect on people by centralizing resources and allowing more advancements to occur, but it also was, the bloodiest places you could be.
Yeah, I guess I'm kind of interested in that whole tie to technology thing, like the ages, the Stone Age, Bronze Age, and all that. I mean, it was basically almost centered around war advancement, right?
Yeah, a lot of technology was back then. Certainly those iron chariots that God couldn't beat, those lots of bows and arrows throughout the years. As things got more advanced, of course you had more advanced stuff, but yeah, that's always been a big driver of technology. And in this period, we have different metallurgies coming of age. And, of course, you have the ages named after that, Bronze Age, Iron Age, etc. And so it's just developing more efficient ways to kill people that makes your society stand out from the others. And then with that amassed wealth you have, conquering others. And so, we move on to from there to the beginning of sort of antiquity and the Greeks. And the Greeks were the first to go on a great pilgrimage to conquer the world. Alexander the Great forging his way through Persia into India, conquering all before him.
Yeah, that's crazy stuff. Was it the Romans or the Greeks who built the road systems? I think it was the Romans.
It was the Romans, yes, the Appian Way.
So all this infrastructure that they needed to move these like vast armies, it's like it's pretty cool to think about because, I mean, I fell into this trap. Like I love fantasy stuff ever since I was a kid, and I loved like thinking about battles and war and stuff. But I never really thought about like the logistics of waging war. It's like to move this many people and to armor, feed. You know what I mean? Take care of these people, make sure they're happy. It's like, once you get into that type of warfare, it's really interesting,
Yeah, and certainly the stomachs of the army have long been a pressuring factor on these countries that were trying to expand because they couldn't provide that sort of resource. And certainly the Roman road system helped with that. But with the lack of mobility, lack of technology to get supplies to them faster, it was still very limiting. And it's ultimately why their empire moved out, very slowly, and it sort of had a point where it couldn't move any further because logistically it just wasn't possible. With the way that their society was organized and with the way that technology had progressed. Certainly you look over in the same period at China, and China is able to conquer an even larger area than Rome.
Really?
Yes, and once the five kingdoms unite, you have more of social infrastructure. The classical Chinese merit-based government systems. And with that,
Oh, wait, hold on. While we're on China, I wanted to mention one thing. And I was just hearing about this the other day. I can't remember where, but in acts of war... Well, okay, so in warfare, there's like acts of aggression where you go out and attack other people. There's also defensive actions, being like the Great Wall of China.
Yes.
So I think that's kind of a neat subject. I don't know if you can touch on it at all, but it's not always attacking. It could be a defensive action,
Yes, ultimately, and, taking humanity as a whole, the defensive action is just a responsive offensive to someone else's offensive. So, the idea of defensive warfare is, often played up as people defending their homelands and things like that. But really, it's being forced to engage in warfare by an army coming in, or sometimes having an army invade after you've tried to invade and failed. And, thus it wouldn't make as much a defensive war as a opportunistic war on their side.
Kind of makes sense. If you defend yourself from an attacker, then all their troops are kind of messed up, so you could just kind of waltz right in there,
Yeah, absolutely. And so the Great Wall worked pretty well at keeping out the Shangmu from the north, but until Genghis Khan came along anyways, he conquered them back. But certainly China was better equipped and had a much longer run as an empire than Rome did because of the way that they had structured their society. From there, we move on to the Middle Ages, and we have sort of disintegration of Europe, and warfare becomes petty between little kings and states, very tribalistic. Meanwhile, in places like India, we're experiencing a much brighter era, and in Arabia especially, they are conquering vast areas. The areas conquered in the initial years of Islam by Muhammad's troops and then successive leaders conquered the largest area the world had ever seen. From Arabia and all North Africa, Middle East.
Even more than the Romans?
Even more than the Romans.
Wow. So was it their society that helped push that, or was it just the uniting of their religion, or what was the driving factor?
A lot of it was, having such a religious fervor. Yeah. But, a lot of it was also snowballing, and the way that they treated the conquered people, convert or die, was...
Oh, you mean so the same way they're doing it now?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Except we have bigger guns now. So it's often forgotten because it's not white people. But certainly during that time, Europe was very weak in comparison to much of the rest of the world.
So was this the Crusades, or leading up to the Crusades, or
this was leading up to the Crusades? Oh, okay. The Crusades would be a few hundred years approximately later. And certainly that would be the next major point. The first real long-distance religious war, where for the sole purpose of religion, people tried to sail across the world to kill people of different faiths. And were somewhat successful in creating a Christian state in Jerusalem until, the Muslims conquered them right back because they were really far from home.
Yeah, it's actually, I think I mentioned this movie before, but one of my favorite movies is called Kingdom of Heaven, and it's based on the Crusades and the Europeans versus the Muslims, basically. And they played it up in that movie like basically they had overextended themselves and they didn't really know the territory. So whenever they would like march their troops out, they didn't know the desert and they didn't have, the knowledge to keep their troops alive and fed in that environment. So did that play a factor, or was that movie right on that? Or?
Yeah, so it was very poorly planned. There were numerous occasions when the Crusades ran into Constantinople. Okay. And in Constantinople, they were trying to help out the Crusaders, but the Crusaders were so hungry and so passionate for war that they just started tearing down the city, and then the Constantinople would just start killing off Crusaders.
Really?
Yeah, and so, you have a sort of unruly army in new territory with no respect for anybody, and it was just such a clusterfuck. It only worked to start the new countries in Israel because they were just so massive due to the pull of religion at the time. And from that point, you have the precipitous decline of the church's warring powers, because their one great venture just failed miserably at the end. And you hear stories of crusades after those major crusades in the Holy Land where, hey, let's go up to Poland and kill all the Jews. Sure. Let's go up to Sweden and kill all the pagans. Sure. So, it kept going from there, and the purposes really got muddled at this point. But, the whole idea of Christianity going out with a giant army killing people is very much against the tenets of the New Testament. Not the Old Testament, but the new one.
Yeah.
Very much not against the tenets of the Old Testament or the Quran. Not to say that Christianity is not really fucked up and no one should listen to it, but still. So then, you get after that to the Renaissance. And in the Renaissance period, people were making a better use of trade routes, and with that, were able to colonize more distant lands with the advent of better sailing technologies in Europe and in China as well, and were able to have these coastal empires. And with these coastal empires, the sea became the dominant route to having economic and thus military success going forward. And so you had the rise of Europe in the Renaissance come from these advanced technologies, which in turn had the reverse effect and started having more advanced technologies pile up upon them by having these dominant militaries go up against each other.
So, was that why were they such a powerhouse for where their navy was so strong? Was it just because of their location? They basically had to be strong navy, or was it there any other driving factor, trade or something?
Yes, trade was a driving factor. There had always been a trade through the Middle East, and until the Ottomans come in and defeat the empire there, the Byzantines, the Christian trade routes were able to go through Asia Minor to access the spices, and the overland trade routes, the Silk Road, so on, were very accessible. But on the advent of the Ottomans, around this time, they had to find another way around. And so they were going through the Mediterranean, trying to go through Africa, things like that. And that's when Prince Henry the Navigator and the Portuguese started trying to go around Africa to get to these places, and Vasco da Gama going to India and things like that. And with this sort of new mindset coming into the mind of Europe's leaders is when Columbus goes to Ferdinand and Isabella and asks them, hey, why don't I try just going west? And so, that whole age of discovery really just compounds from there. To answer your question. Warfare from this point, due to the primacy of navies in trade does go to the seas. And in the beginning, the Spanish Armada rules the seas, and they're the world's dominant power at the beginning of the Renaissance due to that. And slowly, as Spain really kind of fucks it up with their colonies in South America, and just tries to kill everybody there, rape the land without really building anything, people start to try and take them on in nearby countries. And this is where the rise of France comes in, and they challenge Spain on the land, and the rise of England comes soon after that, because they are able to use their naval heritage to build large-scale naval forces, and thus they, in turn, come to rule the world from their tiny little island.